Hello and welcome to the Recruit Rockstars podcast, where we focus on the people part of your venture capital or private equity funded company. I'm your host, Jeff Hyman. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I interview a world-class expert on talent and recruiting so that you can build a company filled with rock stars. Today's guest runs a fascinating business. I don't know what to make of it. I've used it. I love it. I hate it. He's going to tell you all about it. It's really probably one of the first artificial intelligence businesses that I, at least knowingly, have interacted with. You probably have too. And that is x.ai. It's super cool. But first, let me tell you a little about its founder, its CEO, Dennis Mortensen. Dennis has started and led a number of companies. This is not his first rodeo in the startup game. He was the chief operating officer at Index Tools, which was essentially web analytics, acquired by Yahoo. He stayed at Yahoo a while, decided to do it all again, founded Visual Revenue, which was predictive analytics this time. And that was acquired by Outbrain before he became the founder and CEO of x.ai. And you've probably used this thing. It helps you schedule your meetings without having the phone tag and the person in between. It does it all for you. You probably even used it. You didn't even know you used it. So we're going to talk about that. And we're going to talk about how Dennis is scaling the team. It's about 25 people based in New York. And with that, welcome to the show, Dennis.
Thanks much for having me.
I'm thrilled to meet you and talk about this fascinating business. And then we'll talk about the people part. First, give just 30 seconds on x.ai as a company and a product.
Sure. So come the end of the day, we really do nothing but help people schedule meetings. So you shoot me an email saying, hey, Dennis, I'm going to be in New York come second week of Feb. Do you got time to meet up for a Diet Coke? The way we would usually solve that, unless, of course, you won the corporate lottery and got a human assistant, is that I will reply back and say, yeah, I'm up for that. We do a little bit of ping pong. You say you come in Tuesday. I say I'm maxed out. We can do early Wednesday. You say sure. I say 9 a.m. You say 9:30. I say yes. You say, where are you at? I say 200 Broadway. And there's nothing odd about what I just described.
It probably goes back and forth 10, 15 times.
I can give you a stat here if you're a meeting scheduling geek. So on average, it takes 8.01 email, including the invite, to get something on the calendar.
8.
About 3.5 emails on each side.
Got it.
And it's not that it's difficult, as in you and me know exactly how to do this. It's just that it's yet another chore for where I know immediately whether I want to meet with you. And I do. What I don't want to do is sit and fiddle with whether we should meet one day or another, or one time or another. As long as I know I want to meet with you, I just want it to happen.
Yeah.
So what we spent the last 5 years trying to engineer is this set of intelligent agents that can schedule this on your behalf. So I can immediately reply back and say, yeah, I'm up for that. I have CC'd in Amy, so you can put something on my calendar for 2 hours at 200 Broadway when you're in town. Send, archive. Now it's Amy's job to, 1, figure out that I'm her boss, 2, understand the very request, see my preferences, see the current constraints, see whether you're a customer. If not, reach out to you in natural language and kind of present a set of options. Of course, even more awesome, if you're already a customer, then just align our preferences and make the whole thing happen instantly. And the whole thing
there's a lot of rules here, right? Very rules-based.
It's one of those problems for where if you and me get together over the weekend and we think about it for a couple of minutes, it sounds like a weekend hackathon.
Yeah.
Then you spend half an hour thinking about it. You think, oh, perhaps it's more like a 3 months Y Combinator thing. Then you spend a week thinking about it, and then you kind of figure out, shit, I probably need to stay in that basement for years, which is what we kind of did before we can solve it. But it's a very easy to understand kind of problem, but super kind of complex, because even though there's really 3 primary things we're trying to solve for: time, location, and people. Yeah. It's just
and not only that, but you can't afford to drop the ball, right? If Amy forgets or goes into a black hole, you got a problem.
That's actually a very good observation, and perhaps not immediately obvious, certainly to me on day one 5 years ago, for where there's plenty of predictions that you can make in plenty of verticals for where any prediction you make that is of value is received positively. And anything which is of not value is just discarded and you don't think about it. Such as you uploading a picture to Facebook. There's 5 people in the picture. They pick out 3. Oh, thanks, Mark. That's at least 3 people I don't have to kind of label myself. But you don't get mad of that being a 60% accuracy.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you did that for a car, for where you can't figure out whether the item in front of it is a plastic bag or a baby, that is never going to be a self-driving car, right?
Sure.
I happen to be in that kind of latter category for where there's no kind of pat on the back for a meeting almost set up like, oh, you almost did it, Amy. No, either we meet or we don't. And if we don't, you fucked up.
If I'm scheduling my brain surgery with you and I never hear back, I got a problem. So I think it's safe to say, Dennis, that you were one of the pioneers of an AI-focused real product, not a daydream. Is that safe to say?
I certainly believe that we were among the very first, and I don't even have a good example of consumer-facing AI, where in a fully autonomous mode, we try to get an agent to interact with a human and do it all on its own, with all of the kind of initial kind of flaws and obstacles that kind of came along with that.
You've raised venture capital along the way. You've got a team of, 25 people concentrated in New York, but you've got some others not in New York. Is that right?
So on March 1st this year, we went fully remote. And here's a funny story. I probably spent the last 2 decades pitching against the idea of remote because I'm getting, old and annoying. But after March 1st, there's all sorts of, things that are not as optimal in a remote setting, but I think it is being outweighed by all of the good things that comes along with us being a remote team.
So it has won you over.
It's kind of won me over, and I'm a little bit disappointed by my own viewpoint of where did all these opinions come from, Dennis, when you didn't even really had any experience. It was just all opinion. And now that I've done it, at least I got experience and I'll have some commentary. But we used to be a different type of team. So we had about 100 people alone, fully employed to do nothing but labeling. So any machine learning startup, if at least you need to label some data, some sort of supervised setting for where you don't think you can do any predictions unless you get some high quality corpus. And we had that team in place for years on end. But the goal was obviously always one for where we reach some sort of inflection point for where we now not need to kind of label the data anymore, but the very use of the product becomes the labeling. And we hit that on June 1st last year.
2019. And
2019.
So you went from 100 people overnight to 25?
Oh, that was just 100 people who labeled. So that was a massive investment. So if you take a lot of, if not the majority of the venture capital that we raised, it's gone into this corpus, and it is extremely unique. Now, of course, it's on us to see if we can capitalize on that investment, but it is a unique corpus. We're talking about tens of millions of individual items in emails being hand labeled.
Wow.
But now we can make extremely accurate predictions in this very vertical that we're in. So you'll look at people making all sorts of kind of predictions around, say, temporal expressions, but in my particular space, we can do it at an accuracy really completely unheard of, but only for meeting scheduling.
I have to ask you, since you are probably one of the world's authority on scheduling meetings, if not what's the optimal length of a meeting?
That's a very good question. Somehow we got tricked into believing that meetings should have a duration that visually look okay on my calendar.
Right. It's exactly right.
As in, it needs to be an hour or half an hour, or if I'm very anal and I look at my calendar in 15-minute blocks, which almost nobody does. That means if I go extract, we can look at hundreds of thousands of meetings, almost all of them are one, which is the most popular one, half an hour. After that, an hour, and after that, 45 minutes.
Got it.
Then, if we have a data set this large, we should conclude that half an hour is the right one. I'm not sure I believe that. I think that is just because we got tricked into believing that it should be half an hour.
It might actually be 7 minutes or something, right?
I think you're right. I think we should have the courage to run a meeting for the duration that is needed. And sometimes that is 7 minutes. But I think some people feel uncomfortable 7 minutes in calling and say, thank you. Yeah. That was the decision I was looking for. Everybody have a wonderful day.
Yeah. So you need to block out the time, but be prepared to cut it short, which people appreciate. You're giving them a gift of time. They love it. Every time I have a meeting that I give people back time, they're like, oh my God, you're the best.
It is dangerous though, because most people who block out time, there'll be some participant in that meeting who feel either obligated or eager to extract as much whatever from that 1 hour allotted. But I actually do like the idea, and when we think about it, of allotting that full hour, but be courageous enough to do it for 7 minutes.
Tell us about the DNA of the 25 people at the company with regard to meeting scheduling. It would strike me that as a group, these 25 people must have something in common, no matter what their role is, design, programming, marketing. That's, I don't know if are they anal retentive, or do they all wear a huge watch? Like, what is it about these 25 people that would make you say, I get why they work at x.ai?
It's an interesting question, isn't it? Because you and me could turn up at any Python, NLP, machine learning startup in Manhattan. And if I walked over to the first maker and said, hey, do you want to work with me for the next 5 years on meetings? They would say, Dennis, bugger off. Are you fucking crazy? That is the thing that I hate the most.
Yeah,
and
right.
I will never work on that with you or anybody or me.
Yeah.
So hiring engineers for this particular challenge was interesting. But jokes aside, I think generally, if you think about bringing a team together or just hiring good people, there are certainly two ends to that, or that pendulum can swing to two sides. And I think the two extremes are, on one side, you being some health insurance company for where people would mostly only go work there because I need to pay rent, and there's nothing about what you do that kind of excites me. Then there's the other side where the pendulum swings to the side where I will do anything, including kind of decrease in salary, commute like hell, and sacrifice all sorts of things to work on this challenge. And you obviously want the pendulums to swing to that side for where you are working on something for where you actually don't really hire people. People seek you out and ask for permission to work for you.
They're lined up around the block.
And that is where, if you can make that happen, that becomes interesting.
So have you figured that out for your business?
So what we did, and certainly where I think we've been quite successful, in particular in the beginning, was to create some setting for where we made it very clear that we are completely in the dark and we're looking for people who are very comfortable in the dark. And given that language is not a solved science, you need to be ready to kind of jump into the pool, not being able to see shore on the other side, and swim with me. We're probably going to drown, but we're going to be heroes at least, and people will talk about us. Because
after we're gone,
dumb enough to work for 5 years trying to solve language, kind of knowing that it's unsolvable or potentially unsolvable. But what we thought we could do was carve out some corner of the language universe, and through that and a ton of labeling, some good product design, perhaps be able to create these agents. And I think that particular challenge certainly drew in people from academia and research, for where plenty of the research you do will never pan out. As in, that was the whole point. It will still be looked on as a successful experiment. It just wasn't what I thought it would be, or the hypothesis I had in mind, we couldn't validate. And for that, I wrote this initial x.ai pledge, for where I wouldn't really hire on offer letters and options and all that kind of flim-flam you need to put in place to run a real company. I would have this kind of half-page, almost battle cry of a poem which I put in front of people and said, hey, if you can agree with this, then you and me should do something together.
So there's actually a piece of paper.
You can go to it right now, x.ai/pledge.
And this
and
was
the very first lines kind of states or starts with, we are looking for people who are comfortable in the dark. And you will look at it and say, Dennis, what are you talking about? But the people who know what I'm talking about are the very people I want to work with.
It's fascinating. I'm actually looking at it, and the listeners have to check this out, x.ai/pledge. And what I think you're doing from a recruiting perspective is you're telling people what you stand for. If you join our team of misfits, you're signing up to this same set of beliefs, right?
Exactly.
How did you figure that out? That is not a common thing. Did you have a leader or a manager you worked for that helped you see the benefit of doing that?
So there's perhaps, at least within startup, two schools of thought. There is this West Coast, Peter Thiel idea that startup or entrepreneurship, perhaps as a whole, is something you do when you stumble upon something for where you cannot not do it. You must simply go do this. But then there's also the idea, at least as I see it, that entrepreneurship could be a lifelong career. And if you do enough startups, you might at some point either become good at it and or increase the odds of hitting a home run. And home run is really just making a few monies and be happy about having successfully delivered on some idea. And perhaps that is the only way, if you think about it, which is that if some VC out of 1,000 startups pick 20 to invest in, knowing that 18 of them will go tits up and 2 of them might pay back the fund, that means if I only pick one startup, how cocky am I? As in, I pick one and that works.
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
That sounds completely unrealistic. So I can't run the 4-year fund like any kind of VC fund, but I might be able to run the 50-year fund, for where in serial, I can run about 5 years on each venture, accepting that most of them probably won't work, but some of them will. And after 50 years, I can lean back and say, you know what? That was fun. We really did some interesting work. And this one, that blew up, didn't it? Lost 2 fingers on that. And this one here, oh, that worked well. That kind of paid for my Wall Street apartment. That was cool. And with that, to kind of answer your question, I think on my 3rd startup, and this is my 5th, and I've been working on it for the last 24 years, spent about 5 years on each.
You're halfway there.
I'm halfway there. I figured out that nobody really falls in love with an offer letter. And people rarely, but sometimes fall in love with you, but it's really just you being an extension of the mission. As in
the work. You got to fall in love with the work.
You have to fall in love with where we're at and where we headed.
Yeah.
Because if where we headed is an interesting destination, I'll join you, Dennis. If I can see you can help me get us there, let's do it. And I think at some point that became, perhaps it should have been obvious 2 days into my entrepreneurial career at 21 or 22 or something like that. But I think on my 3rd venture, it just became crystal clear. And I started writing these pledges, which I've done for my 2 prior startups as well. And I'll give you one example here. This is, I'm not suggesting you should replicate everything in this story, but it's a story about the pledge. So we used to have this idea that a new engineer should be able to come in, and we gave him a disassembled desktop. So CPU, memory, motherboard, the whole thing.
Yeah.
And then I gave you a ticket of some bug in the system. Your job now, before you leave, is to take this disassembled set of pieces of hardware, assemble that, set up the whole system, figure out how to load that onto that particular desktop and have the environment kind of running, fix the bug, and push it to production before you leave the first day.
And then disassemble the computer.
That whole thing was kind of it was a funny little gimmick.
But this wasn't part of the interview process. This was after they joined.
This was day one.
It was like an initiation.
That was exactly what it was.
You must have been a wild fraternity guy at college.
We were, yes. And you know what? In hindsight, it did create some sort of camaraderie between the engineers, because some of them would stay late and kind of see this individual kind of struggle. And hell, how many of us have really assembled a desktop PC of late? Sure, we all did, perhaps you and me, because we're slightly older in college, but not really in the last 10 years. But we kind of forced them to, and it created these very interesting kind of settings. Now, it was a little bit too much for one guy, Steven. And you know what? He was right and I was wrong, but we still kind of forced it. I then, the next day, kind of came in and he left. He quit.
After the one day?
No, he was there for 3 days.
Okay.
But that was certainly the catalyst.
Yeah.
Now, coming back to the pledge, do you know what he left at my desk? So he came in early. He left 3 things at my desk. He left the pledge that he printed out, a note saying, I simply don't think I can live up to this, and I'm not the right person for this journey, and his key card.
Wow.
He didn't leave some sort of proper termination letter of, I assume I'm going to get my 14 days, and am I going to be on Cobra, and all sorts of other things. No, my key card and the pledge, and I don't think I can do the journey, Dennis.
Which tells you that you achieved the objective.
I achieved the objective. Sure, I had a shitty process or some sort of boyish dream of forcing engineers to do something, but that's besides the point. The point is that he actually bought into the idea of the pledge and us, him and me, being on a journey together. And that certainly made me happy, and it certainly made me double down on the.
You became a real believer at that point.
Here's another funny point I have to tell you.
Yeah.
Because my counsel continues to tell me that Dennis, you're an idiot. And I continue to tell him, I think you're the idiot here. So I have people sign the pledge. And he continues to tell me, Dennis, this is not a legal document. What the hell are you signing? Hey, Mark, you don't get it. When we sign this document, me and Steven, we are becoming brothers or sisters. And the signing itself is not me being able to take him to court at some point saying, hey, on line 17, we agreed on this. No, this is me and him shaking hands on, it's going to be dark, cold, long, and we're probably not going to make it. And signing it is surely not legally binding, but is socially binding. And I don't think
it's a moral commitment, not a legal commitment. It's almost like becoming blood brothers, right?
I'm the guy who would do the whole knife thing at the office. Had this not been the US and me being sued exactly 3 hours in, but sure, I would do that. Cut my hand, you do the same, we shake hands, and now we're in it.
So how, aside from putting the pledge in front of candidates, how have you learned to assess candidates to figure out if they're likely to succeed in the role? I understand that they're likely to succeed in the company and the mission, but the job itself. Do you rely on interviews or something else?
So we do all, before people think that this is, we're completely crazy. So we put in place all the traditional processes. We, like anybody else, believe that we tuned it to perfection, and none of us have. So we'll have a process for where each of the steps are somewhat of a replica of anybody else who's been on this podcast. And we try then to tune it to our particular setting. And I think where we at least try to do well, and anybody else will say the same, is on the actual interviewing, for where, what is it that I am trying to extract from this particular interview? And what is it that each one of my questions are trying to do to help me answer that question? And why is it that this should not be a chit chat, or I just send in people willy-nilly to have a go around and pat on the back, but being kind of very deliberate. But all that aside, so everybody will at least be trying, at least should try to do that.
They should try. They don't, but they should at least aspire to.
Aspire to. So we have all of that, and we'll have some 7 odd steps, and where if I were to kind of handpick one particular item. So the reason I picked out the pledge is just that I don't think everybody puts something in place that rhymes with that. So I think that could be an interesting input, at least for people in their own way to figure out whether that will fit into their organization. Another thing I've seen work well is on non-maker roles. So for maker roles, engineers and data scientists and so on and so forth, a lot of the interviewing will be aligned to the very doing that you have to do when you arrive here. And it's interestingly enough one of those roles that you can test for reasonably well.
Yeah.
It is actually much harder to test the account executive or the customer success manager or the social media manager or any one of the commercial roles for where there's no 17 lines of code that we can go have a chat about.
Yeah.
There's the idea that you might be able to, as an SDR, do some 40 calls this week and push 4 of them forward to the account executive.
Yeah.
But how do you actually test for that?
Yeah.
So on the non-makers, we have tried to put in place actual testing. And that is not as easy. So how do you test a marketing manager? If they are being measured by, I don't know, in B2B, number of leads at the top, or any number of other kind of metrics that you and me could put in place that would be, honest and fair.
So what have you come up with as an example?
So we have these reasonably elaborate kind of whiteboard sessions. Most of them start with the conclusion, as in, if I'm at 1,700 some leads at the top, and I want to get to, say, 3,400 at some point. Now we know what we need to reach. Now, what are all the things which we need to put in place to kind of make that happen? So I'll write 3,400 at one end of the whiteboard. There's probably going to be some 13 steps before I actually make that happen. You now need to describe each one of those steps. I don't want you to necessarily align to my idea of what that funnel might look like, but you need to have some clear thinking about what does it look like and be able to describe exactly what are each of the components in each one of these steps and how do you imagine that you go about executing them. And if you can't kind of go from one step to the next or create that connect, or at least be able to apply the proper vocabulary throughout those steps, then I think you might just have some fantasy of this materializing, but not yet have been able to do it prior. Then you're just kind of trying to go employ yourself upwards, and sometimes that's cool, and that's one of the steps that you're weaker on than others, but you should be able to do so. And we see plenty of people who do, a good talk around the round table, but can't do the whiteboard.
What percent can't do it? Can't do that exercise?
I think for us, and that is perhaps more a flaw on our end, that 2/3 stumble on the whiteboard and 1/3 do well. And it's typically on the whiteboard that I personally get dazzled. There's nothing more, and I'm sure people listening, magical than being in some interview for where you are being schooled, right? As in, there's some step for where I'm trying to say something and now I'm being schooled, and that is pure joy, right? As in, damn, yes, I'm the amateur. Now we're talking. I said, that is the best possible interview for where you're right. First of all, I think I might even be jumping a step here, and you're right. I didn't see that. That's why that's not my job.
Yeah.
And then I personally get super excited, right?
That's when you need to hire that person.
Then we're talking to the right person, right?
I love it. Dennis, I could talk to you all day. I'm afraid of going past your schedule because I know your schedule has increments, but you clearly have done a lot of thinking and a lot of experimenting around how to get the right people in the right seats I give you a ton of credit for that. It's not easy to do. How can people learn more about x.ai or get in touch with you?
I am everywhere on the internet under the Dennis Mortensen moniker. So go search from LinkedIn to Twitter to what have you. On the company end, because I am an entrepreneur, so forever the hustler, I would highly encourage, if you are slightly curious about AI, to go sign up for x.ai. It's free, so I'm not trying to kind of extract money from you, and see exactly where we're at today, as in, what is it that I can write to this agent? And why is it that it understands when I say, hey, set something up with my friend Monica for half an hour at my office 2 weeks from now, and kind of play around with it a little bit.
See if you can stump it.
You can easily do that because people are, or humans are crazy. Yeah. But that's the funny part.
Amy is not crazy yet, but people are. Well, Dennis, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure getting to know you, and thanks again for making the time.
Time well spent. Cheers, mate.